Hello and welcome to the FollowInTruth podcast, a podcast dedicated to sharing the truth about what the Bible really says. I'm your host LJ, and the title of this episode is Moses was likely not considered a prince of Egypt. So the story of Moses' early life, growing up in the Egyptian palace as the adopted son of the daughter of Pharaoh, the grandson of Pharaoh. Sometimes this is adopted son of the wife of Pharaoh, and so son of Pharaoh. He grew up as a prince of Egypt in the palace, often depicted as having a bitter rivalry with Pharaoh's real son, Ramses. The Hebrew Israelites even used this story to show that Moses was black. Moses being accepted as the son or grandson of Pharaoh, this would only have been possible if Moses looked like an Egyptian. They will point to the fact that he was called an Egyptian in Midian, when he helped some women. One, who later became his wife, drew some water from a well. Exodus 2:19. And they said, An Egyptian delivered us out of the hand of the shepherds, and also drew water enough for us, and watered the flock. Obviously, this presupposes that the Egyptians were themselves black, and that Moses was presumed to be an actual grandson or son of the Pharaoh. It also says nothing regarding calling Moses an Egyptian based on skin colour. I am from England, and I am white. Not all white people are from England, and not all English people are white. So, it is simply supposed that Moses was called an Egyptian based on his skin colour. We must also point out that other nations were also black, so how did they distinguish Moses as an Egyptian through his skin colour? It is just as likely that Moses was wearing clothes of an Egyptian, seeing that he was living in Egypt. Maybe he even spoke the dialect or had an accent. We simply don't know, and any guess is exactly that. The biblical narrative, which is actually not very detailed, is quite different from the common story told. Moses was born of a Levite man and a Levite woman, Exodus 2:1. And there went a man of the house of Levi, and took to wife a daughter of Levi. This was during a time where the Hebrews were being severely persecuted by the Egyptian Pharaoh. He had ordered Hebrew midwives to kill all male babies born to the Hebrews in order to try and stem their numbers, which we are told of back in Exodus 1, Exodus 1:15. And the king of Egypt spake to the Hebrew midwives, of which the name of the one was Shiphrah, and the name of the other Puah. And he said, When ye do the office of a midwife to the Hebrew women, and see them upon the stools, if it be a son, then ye shall kill him, but if it be a daughter, then she shall live. This was because they had grown plentiful, and the Pharaoh was worried that they would join with the enemies of Egypt. Exodus 1:9. And he said unto his people, Behold, the people of the children of Israel are more and mightier than we. Come on, let us deal wisely with them, lest they multiply. And it come to pass, when there falleth out any war, they join also unto our enemies, and fight against us, and so get them up out of the land. So when Moses was born, his mother hid him. Exodus 2:12. And the woman conceived, and bare a son. And when she saw him, that he was a goodly child, she hid him 3 months. Now notice that Moses was hidden for 3 months before his mother put him in the basket on the river. Moses, although a baby, was not by this time a newborn baby. Exodus 2:3. And when she could no longer hide him, she took for him an ark of bulrushes, and daubed it with slime and with pitch, and put the child therein, and she laid it in the flags by the river's brink. Now the Bible very clearly states that it was the Pharaoh's daughter and not wife that found Moses. Exodus 2:5. And the daughter of Pharaoh came down to wash herself at the river, and her maidens walked along by the river's side. And when she saw the ark among the flags, she sent her maids to fetch it. And when she had opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the babe wept. And she had compassion on him, and said, This is one of the Hebrews' children. The Pharaoh's daughter knew straight away that this was a Hebrew child. She had no doubts or thoughts it might be an Egyptian. If him being called an Egyptian is proof that he did not stand out from the Egyptians, then this can be used as a counterproof that in fact he did stand out from the Egyptians and looked like a Hebrew. Unlike what is commonly believed, Moses was not taken straight to the palace, where he grew up as the son of the Egyptian princess, and therefore was an Egyptian prince, or as the Hebrew Israelites think, that he was mistaken for an Egyptian, which proves he was black. Do they really think that the princess just came home one day and, unbeknown to the pharaoh, she had a 3-month-old baby, and he just presumed that it was hers? Was Moses really considered the actual son of Pharaoh's daughter, unknown to the pharaoh himself that he wasn't? Again, this obviously also presupposes that the Egyptians were black, and in order for Moses to have passed as a legitimate son of the princess. The biblical narrative then states that the sister of Moses, who would have been a Hebrew, asked the Egyptian princess if she could get a Hebrew nurse to nurse the baby. Exodus 2:7. Then said his sister to Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and call to thee a nurse of the Hebrew women, that she may nurse the child for thee?" The princess replies for her to do so, and she brings Moses' mother. Exodus 2:8. And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Go," and the maid went and called the child's mother. Moses' mother takes the child and nurses him, while being paid to do so by the princess. Exodus 2:9. And Pharaoh's daughter said unto her, "Take this child away, and nurse it for me, and I will give thee thy wages." And the woman took the child and nursed it. Before he is brought back, after he had grown, to the princess. It is only then, when Moses was not being nursed, which means he was now weaned, does he become the son of the princess. Weaning, under Jewish law, can be anywhere from 18 months to 5 years. Exodus 2:10. And the child grew, and she brought him unto Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. And she called his name Moses, and she said, "Because I drew him out of the water." Now, in the biblical story, there is no pretense. Pharaoh doesn't think Moses is the real son of his daughter. As we have seen, it is most definitely not Pharaoh's own wife who takes in Moses, so he is certainly not considered Pharaoh's son. There is no mention of any rivalry between Moses and Ramses, the real son of Pharaoh. There is no mention of Moses being considered an Egyptian prince. In fact, the biblical story is not detailed at all. We have to go beyond the Bible in order to add any further context to the early life of Moses. When Moses is 40 years old, he kills an Egyptian who was smiting one of his brethren. Exodus 2:11. And it came to pass in those days, when Moses was grown, that he went out unto his brethren, and looked on their burdens, and he spied an Egyptian smiting an Hebrew, one of his brethren. And he looked this way and that way, and when he saw that there was no man, he slew the Egyptian, and hid him in the sand. And notice that Moses was looking at the burdens of his brethren. Moses knew he was a Hebrew. There was no surprise to discover he was a Hebrew. The fact that Moses was looking at the burdens of his brethren would indicate he was not a partaker in the burdens, which in itself indicates that Moses was living a different lifestyle, which could mean he was living with his Egyptian princess mother. Even if he was, which is likely, we still have no narrative that he was seen as or treated as a prince. Notice as well that after he killed the Egyptian, the only response we see from the Pharaoh, his adopted grandfather, was to seek his death. Exodus 2:15. Now when Pharaoh heard this thing, he sought to slay Moses. But Moses fled from the face of Pharaoh, and dwelt in the land of Midian, and he sat down by a well. Now this is hardly the response of a man that was entreating Moses as his grandson, or even his son, as some stories have it. There is no seeking to ascertain the reason for the actions of Moses, just a simple desire to have him killed. So Moses leaves for 40 years before being called by God to return to Egypt to free the Hebrews from the slavery. He is told that he will be helped by his brother Aaron, after Moses claims he is not a good speaker. Exodus 4:14. And the anger of the Lord was kindled against Moses, and he said, Is not Aaron the Levite thy brother? So again, Moses knew that Aaron was his brother, further highlighting the fact that Moses, being a Hebrew, was not a surprise to him. He didn't believe that he was an Egyptian. By this time the Pharaoh had died, Exodus 2:23, and it came to pass, in process of time, that the king of Egypt died, and the children of Israel sighed by reason of the bondage, and they cried, and their cry came up unto God by reason of the bondage. A new Pharaoh, the real son of the previous Pharaoh, was now in rule of Egypt. Moses is sent to Pharaoh by God. Again, unlike in many films or stories about Moses, this Pharaoh that Moses returned to was not his grandfather or father, and in fact it was not his supposed brother and rival. When Moses first goes to see Pharaoh, there is no recognition, no resumed bitter rivalry between the two brothers. In fact, there is no mention at all that they even knew each other. Exodus 5:1. And afterwards Moses and Aaron went in, and told Pharaoh, Thus saith the Lord God of Israel, Let my people go, that they may hold a feast unto me in the wilderness. And Pharaoh said, Who is the Lord, that I should obey his voice to let Israel go? I know not the Lord, neither will I let Israel go. Just simply Moses doing as he had been instructed by God to do. Just before this, Moses demonstrates to the Hebrews that he was sent from God to them. There is no mention of the Hebrews understanding that Moses was an Egyptian prince. Moses, being a prince of Egypt, is simply not biblical. Moses being mistaken as being the grandson or son of the Pharaoh is not biblical. Moses having a rivalry with Pharaoh's son Ramses is not biblical. While it is very likely that Moses had some kind of privileged life separate from the rest of the Hebrews, Moses was aware that he was a Hebrew, and no pretense was made otherwise. Thank you very much for listening to the Following Truth podcast. I hope the information has been useful. I look forward to seeing you on the next one, and please remember to subscribe and like.